Hello and welcome to another AGK tutorial. This is basically how to make a simple game, a simple shooting game. It's going to take you through some of the stuff you've already learnt from prior tutorials and put them all together basically and make a little game. Right, so we'll start off. I'm just setting the default minimum and maximum magnification filter with these two commands to 0. That just basically, so if you have it set it at 1, it smooths all the graphics. If you set it to 0, it makes them display as they are, which is pin sharp or blocky, if you want to call it blocky. Unfortunately, if you set it to 1, when you use Atlas textures, generally you get a bit of a glitch around some of the sprites, and that's not good. So I tend to set most of my games to 0 and just make sure the graphics are correct for the game, and you don't need to smooth them if whatever. I mean, the graphics in this aren't brilliant, which I'll show you in a minute, but it's a game and you can see how basic things work from it. So anyway, that's taken 5 minutes to explain that. Set physics debug on, that is just simply so you can see the collision shape of your objects is correct. I've remmed it out because I know it's correct, I don't need it anymore. It also slows down the system a bit while recording, and that's no good. Orientation alert, now this you don't really need it, but obviously if you're going to use an Android or even an iPhone, but I think you have to do things differently with the iPhone, this command here will force it into the orientation you want, which in this case is portrait, landscape. It forces it into a landscape mode, and then this here is getting the width of the device, so it's automatically grabbing whatever device size you've got and setting these variables to equal them. And then if the width is less than the height, because in a portrait resolution the width should never be less than the height, it's basically changing the height and the width to be the width and the height. Just swaps them around a bit with that little bit of code. That's my old resolution, that's my new resolution. That's just so I could see how fast it was going. It was like 2,500 frames or whatever. It was going ridiculous. And enable clear color is to give a little sort of blurry effect, which it does work, but it doesn't work on Android, so I've remmed it out for now. But I will show you what it looks like in this. Setting up a few types. The only difference here I've done is instead of putting sprite, speed, fire one after the other on lines, I've just separated them with colons, which is exactly the same difference. So obviously I've got player, bullet and enemy, which are pretty self-explanatory really. And then I'm making defining player as player, so it's using the player type, and I'll do the same with bullet and enemy later on. I'm setting some basic variables. This is useful stuff, especially if you want to be able to repeat your game and loop it. These are default variables that are all being set, and you would just have to basically run this again, or this part, to get the game to reset. At the moment it just ends when you die. So you've got some simple settings, you can change everything. So you've got the health, that's the 100%, 100, you could make it a different number obviously. X and Y are the position of the player. Max bullets and max enemies, you can increase that if you want to increase how many bullets are possible to fire at once and how many enemies can come at you at once. But 10 and 20 is a pretty reasonable amount in the main for this sort of game. That's just setting planet to the max health, so I can use that within the game without affecting max health. Difficulty again is just difficulty level I've set. Sound level is so you can alter the level of the sound in an option screen later on if you wanted to. Planet regen is how fast the planet will regenerate. You need that to be a pretty small number, else the game's going to be incredibly easy. Lives, self-explanatory, set that to whatever you want. Old lives is just a way of checking later on in the code when you're checking for things like your score and stuff. Fire rate is how fast you can fire, you can increase that or decrease it if you want faster firing. Score, obviously an old score, doing the same as the old lives, that'll be explained later on in the code. Right, so I'm making a player sprite, or rather a backdrop sprite here. I'm loading one image up. That image has everything. I'll flip to the image. That's the image. It's got everything you need. It's got the main backdrop, it's got the enemy, it's got explosion for the enemy, it's got the player and the player's explosion and the player's bullets all in one, and then a big picture there for the backdrop. This to show you can use animated sprite tiles quite differently. You don't have to stick to one size. You can have different size sprites in there, no problem, and that's without having to use an atlas texture, which I tend to find just finicky. It's a pain. You've got to find all the coordinates out and everything for the sprites you want. It's fair enough if you've got a really bad sprite image that's not nicely chunked up, but I tend to find it easier just to get the badly displayed sprite image and chunk it up to a nicely one, so we can just use standard commands. So back to AGK. So you see that's making a sprite of the backdrop. It's got a animation size of 512 by 256 with 2 frames. So if we go back to this image, that's basically splitting this image up into 2 big frames, plop and plop, these two. Obviously I'm never going to use that one in that particular image, but this one is the backdrop image, so I'm just basically using that part of the image. And set the sprite frame to 2, which is obviously the right frame, and then we've got a backdrop image. Then I'm creating the player sprite, or rather no, the backdrop sprite that's underneath the main display, which is going to be this one here. That's just for the floor basically, and again I'm doing the same. I'm setting the sprite size to that. This is a different size, 64, because it's only a little Diddy 64 by 64 sprite. So it uses the full range of frames, 64 by 64 and 64 frames. I'm setting the sprite frame there to frame 20, which is what it is in that picture. Setting the size just so it goes to the right width of the screen, because I'm stretching it all across the bottom of the screen, and positioning it just down the bottom. And I'll quickly run the game here so I can point out what I'm talking about. That's the bottom sprite, that's the main level sprite, that's your player sprite, which you haven't got to yet. Right, okay, that's that explained. Now this is the actual player sprite itself, just grabbing off the same image. I'm using the same sprites. It's the first actual sprite I've made within the game proper that's going to be used. But they all use the same image. Pretty explanatory there. I'm just setting it frame 11, which of course on this picture is frame 11. There we go. 64 again, putting it XY, which is the position of the player sprite I explained, and setting the sprite shape of course for all these for collision, and 3 is polygon collision, so it'll set it up right. It's important to set the sprite frame before you set the shape, because if you set the shape before the frame, it's going to set the sprite shape of 1, which is going to be that one in that case, or in the case of the backdrop it would have been this one, and we'd have had a little displayed image of that. So you've got to make sure you get the sprite shape set after you've set the frame for each particular thing. Player.speed, that's just how fast you can move. I could have set that to a variable, but I haven't bothered, mainly because I probably missed it. Dimensioning the bullet array with max bullets, which we set at the top, and it's creating sprites and positioning them just off the screen, setting the sprite frame to the right frame. Again, 19 is the actual image that we'll be needing for that sprite, just that one. And again I'm setting the frame after the shape, so setting the shape after the frame, so it's the correct shape. I'm doing the same for enemies. I'm going to the max enemies, I'm positioning them off the screen out the way. You realise I'm using here obviously an array to make the enemies, and actually making the enemies directly into the array. It's just a simple way so you can still scroll, loop through a nice little number to target your sprites. You don't want to have to be typing them all individually. It's just a nightmare. You want nice little loops for this sort of thing. So this is doing pretty much the same. The only difference here is I'm setting a random colour, or a random red colour. The rest are set, and that gives, because the image is just a grayscale image that I've created, it gives it a reddish colour, dependent on what the random is, and that just saves you having lots of different coloured sprites. You can just use that command and you've got lots of different coloured sprites. I'm setting a random scale. In fact, am I even using the scale? Yes, I am. I'm getting a random scale so I can then resize the sprites so you get different sized asteroids as well. And that's, again, you don't have to worry about having lots of different images. Again, setting the sprite frame and setting the sprite shape. This here is all text, so I'm making some strings here with the names in that I want to use, and then I'm creating some variables strings, so that'll have the lives, which will be 0 or 2, I should say. Score will be 0 and the planet will be 100 to start with. I'm making strings of all those so I can then convert those strings into actual text, and I'm positioning them and setting them all there. You can do things slightly tidier with a loop and grab, have one string with all these in and cut them out, but I just thought I'd just do it the nice easy way for this, because it's quite a long bit of code as it is. Well, it's 300 lines, it's not exactly long. So that's setting them out, positioning them, all that sort of thing. And finally the sound effects. So we're loading 3 sound effects: an explosion, a second explosion, and a laser shoot. And I'm setting the print colour to black so I can see it. Now we're into the main loop. You see I've remmed quite a few out. That's because, again, I don't want to show you all the game straight away. I can sort of add bits in as I want to go. So we'll see, at the moment we've got control and bullet move, and when I run it, we have a player thing that can move around, and I can fire. And obviously all the rest add in the rest of the game. So I'll put in enemy spawn because it's next here. Let me just quickly run enemy spawn, and now we should get some dropping rocks. Can't do anything to them because there's no collision, but you can see the idea. And there we go, it hits the floor and the floor changes to red. That's why I've got the floor sprite as a different part to the actual backdrop, because then you can do things with it. Now you can see enemies are spawning and dropping. So we go to enemy spawn. Basically it's setting a random 1 to difficulty. Difficulty is 100 to start with, and that difficulty drops as it goes, so it's sort of backwards, but it works for what we want, because obviously the less numbers here, the more chance it's got of activating this and dropping a rock. Obviously it starts at 100 and it goes all the way down to 2 at the moment, so it'll have a 50-50 chance practically of dropping a sprite. I'm setting a little flag called activate. That's just so you can tell that it has actually activated or not. Just for this bit here, it goes through a loop, all of the enemies, and it checks if it's active and activate equals 1, which it will do because it's there. So it sets all the different sprites properties that it needs, positions, angle, the speed it's going to fall at, the angle it's going to rotate at, and whether it's active. And it also sets the active flag to 0. That means it won't carry on. It'll carry on through the rest of the loop, but it'll just ignore it because it's always going to be 0 there. That makes sure that the next time it runs, active will be 1 again, and it'll count up through the enemies properly. The first one it ignore because active will be 1, and then it'll go to the second one and active will be 0, so it'll then flag active as 0, stop it doing it again for the rest, and and that basically lets it spawn the enemies as it's doing. And this bit moves them. It's going through another loop. You can't really do it in the same loop because that bit you just want to activate once, and then this bit you want to activate separately from it, so they keep falling. So if it's active, there, you just set the sprite position. It's a long line, this one. Whoa. Set the sprite position and add on a speed to the Y, so it makes it go down, and that's enemy.speed, which is set just earlier, as you saw, and sets the sprite angle to the angle that it's set there, and that's the speed, of course, as well. And again, our speed, I've just worked it out with a sort of little bit of jiggery pokery maths. Obviously that will alter as the difficulty drops, so the speed will gradually get more chance of being faster as it gets harder. It's just a small little tweak to get the game to increase its difficulty as it goes on. And the angle gets a random out of 1 and 4, which is a very small angle obviously, but we don't want it to be rotating super fast, and then it just checks that as well and sets it to a random sign, so it can be between 1 and 4 and -1 and -4. Easy way of doing that. You could have done different ways to do that, but that's no simple way of getting there. And minus or positive. Right, now this part here, this you would really, if you, especially when you're developing on other devices with different resolutions and ratios, you're not going to be able to use some of these numbers. You would have to alter it to a percentage of the position on screen, more so because of the way the game rescales, obviously, to a 640 by 480 res to 980 by 640 or whatever iPhone is, you know, that sort of thing. And the physical numbers like that won't work, but for this they do, so I'm not too worried about it at the moment. So that's basically checking if the sprite's Y is greater than 358, and if it's already exploding or not, because obviously it's not going to be exploding generally, but once it's exploded it is going to be exploding, so you don't want it to be doing this anymore. So you set the enemy count to be active to 0, so it's no longer active. That's where it sets it to move at the start. You play the sprites there from these frames 1 to 10, that'll make it blow up. And you set it to explode, so again explode's going to be equal to 1, so it'll ignore it in future. Play the sound for it to blow up, take some add some score, or take some score off in this case because it's going to the floor, although I think I'll probably, you know, if I was doing a game I wouldn't have it reduce the score. I just thought I'd leave that in for now. But now normally knocking score off for doing that, it's going to be a bit weird. I don't think I like it, so I'm probably not going to use it. It won't work at the moment anyway because of the way I've coded it. And obviously if the score is less than or equal to 0, then it'll equal 0, so we never want it to be negative. That's just what that little bit's for. And it's reducing the planet valuable by 10, and it's adding creating a hit timer, which is basically 1 second there, so that basically this bit of code here knows how long to make that bottom bit of flash for, so it's 1 second basically. It changes it to red for 1 second just in this little bit of code, because if the timer is less than hit time, it sets the sprite colour to that, and if it's greater than hit time, it sets the sprite colour to that, and that's where it sets it. It only sets it once, so it's only going to be 1 second above timer. And this bit, this is the bit that checks if it's playing, if it's blowing up. So if it's playing, it will basically set the sprite position to a new position, or rather, I should say, if it's not playing. So when it's finished playing, it's gone through all its first loop, it'll then, and obviously it's checking to see if it's exploding, because you may have animation on your sprite other than exploding. I don't think this has at the moment, so I could probably take that out, I could rev that out, but I've just put it in as automatic pilot. You set the sprite position off screen, at a random position, because that's what you want to do with it. Obviously the asteroids, they need to be randomly placed above you, so they drop at different places, and you just reset the variable so that explode 0 and active 0, and just set the sprite frame so it's obviously the right frame, because it's just exploded. It's going to be an explosion frame or something else there, and that's the hit time which I told you about. So that's pretty much gone through the enemy spawn. Not that difficult. This bit may confuse people, but just study it and you'll see what it's doing. It's activate 1, it's controlling how many times it looks through this loop, because obviously you don't want it to just go through, you know, you get a random and it goes, oh yes, enemy count equals 1 or whatever, and then 2, because you need to know when they've stopped being active, when they've been blown up, and this sorts that out nicely. So let's put some collision. In fact, let's put it all in. Well, I don't know what's next. What's next here? Control. We've got that in, and fired. No, that's just a variable. Bullet move. Well, we put collision in. We might as well put the lot in, eh? Oops. Might as well put the lot in, because I'm not really running it very often. Apart from debug, I'll leave that out. So put them all in. Let's just quickly run it, and you'll see what the game is. You can shoot them, they'll blow up with my incredible graphics, and that's basically it. There's not much more to it. Obviously it gets faster and faster as time goes on, and I've also got no limit to stop you going off screen, so you can hide if you want. So I'll just move it across a bit. It'll probably spare sounds to try and do this. In fact it will, but it will eventually get faster. The difficulty is slowly getting harder and harder, and you'll get more and more of these things dropping. You can see the health here repairs itself automatically at a certain rate. That's what the regem's for, and as more and more things hit, it's going to get harder and harder for this health to recoup, and eventually it's just going to kill it. And of course, if I move my bloke in, he can die like that as well. So you got lives and you got the health of the world to worry about. As soon as one or the other goes, it's game over, and that's basically the game. Nothing incredible, but you know, you can work on adding some extra twists or just changing it around a bit. This is just to show you how to get going, get started with the game itself. So let's move back down. Right, control. You've seen this sort of thing before. The only difference I've got here is instead of, well, as well as get raw key state, I've got get joystick X as well. That's how it'll work on an Android, because this will actually work on an Android at the moment. Well, it works on mine. So I thought I'd just put a little bit of code in so you could try it, and if you've got an Android device, you'd be able to send it to your device and have a play with it on that as well. It's just doing the same as ever. X equals X plus a player speed, and that just moves it across the X-axis as you move your joystick or you press the keys. Now this here is fire. So you've got this first section here, that's the basically if you're pressing a key it'll check, and then it'll also check for if you're pressing a joystick button or a virtual button. Simple enough. And if you're pressing one or the other, or indeed both, I should imagine, on some systems, it'd probably be a bit odd, but you could probably control both things at once. It'll play the sound for firing, and it'll go through a loop of bullets and activate the bullets accordingly. So if it's active and fired equals 0, it'll make fire equal 1, it'll make active equal 1, and it gives you a reload timer set up, which is using the fire rate variable that was set up earlier. I think it was 0.4 or 0.6. Again, like I say, you can change that. That's how often you can reload, and then it repeats through. But obviously it only lets you do it every time reload timer. has actually been beaten by the timer, so to speak. And that's about it for that bit. That sets the player position. Just put it in the control section. It could be in the main loop relay or in its own little bit, but I thought controls is probably the best place to put that part. That's what actually moves your sprite, X and Y. Y is never going to alter at this moment. Bullet move, doing exactly the same. Counts through a loop, max bullets. If it's active, it sets it to active 2. That means it's actually going to be moving, because it's active as soon as you press fire. And it sets the speed there. You could have a random speed if you wanted, but it's not really the sort of thing you do in this sort of game. I've given it a speed of 10. That's fairly quick. And then it sets the sprite position to where the actual player is. So it uses the player sprites, X and Y, to position it by offset, of course. And then that positions it just at the right position. As you press fire, it'll come out by your ship, and then it checks there. If it's active 2, which has been set, that's where it moves it up the screen. If I can move it across there, it's minus bullet speed, which as the top is 0 and the bottom will be 480 or whatever, minus makes it go upwards. Bullet end dot speed has been set obviously earlier. And then basically if the sprites go off the screen, then they go back into off the screen in position to where they should be, and they're set to active to 0, and reload is then set to 0. Reload hash, which you're using there. Right, the collision part. Again, fairly simple, pretty much the same as I used in my collision tutorial, but just with this game in mind. It goes through a loop of max enemies here, and it checks if your player sprite has hit with any of the enemy sprites. Dead obviously is, if it's dead 1, it's not going to work. It's not going to hit it again, because obviously you don't want it to hit it and then hit it straight away after. You want to give a bit of time in between hits. As it is, you can die quite easily if there's 2, just space nicely, because you can't move when you die. I've made it purposely, you can't move when you die, so you've got to be very careful with that. So it takes your lives off, gives you a respawn timer. That's how long it takes for you to be able to go back and get shooting again. That plays the death animation, make sure it knows you're dead, and it plays the sound. And then this is still within the end loop. You go through another loop, I've called it an S loop this time, one to max bullets. So this will then check your sprite collision between your bullets and your enemies. And obviously it checks there whether they're exploding or not, because you want your bullets to go through if they're exploding. So if it does find that your bullet and your enemy sprite are hitting each other there, it'll set the sprite position off screen of the bullet, increase your score, play the enemy sprite so it blows up to 10 of the frames for that. It sets enemy explode to equal 1. It obviously makes the bullet no longer active because it'll be deleted when it hits it, and it plays the sound to blow up at the sound level. But I've made it a bit louder there times 2 because it was a bit quiet compared to the bullet sound, the normal shot effect. So I just did that rather than messing around changing the wave volume. So that'll basically sort out the bullet with the bullet collision and everything. And this here checks to see whether your player sprite has been hit and it's playing, which is the death animation. And it checks the respawn timer and the dead flag, and obviously if they're correct, it'll then, or if timer is less than respawn rate and dead equals 1, it'll run this bit of code, which basically makes it visible or not visible, and it makes it flash a bit while it's playing, and until this flash timer's been, well, the flash time has been set to plus 0.05. It's not very long, and obviously that's used later on to stop it from flashing. Well, it stops it from flashing here automatically, really. And then respawn, which is this one here, and it's been set at the top. If you're dead and respawn, time is greater than respawn, it sets the sprite visible, sets the sprite frame to the proper frame for the player, because you don't want it to be left exploding. And it makes sure you're no longer dead, and obviously if your lives are less than or equal to 0 at that point, it ends the game. Just checking that. If not, it carries on. That bit there is just checking if planet hash is less than 0, ends the game, because again that's your planet health. And then we go, planet health underneath. This is running all the time. So basically all it's doing is it's making planet equal planet plus the planet regen all the time, and if it's greater than the max health, which is 100, it just leaves it at the max health. So that's how the planet will count down and up and whatnot as things hit the planet. Difficulty, that just basically decreases the difficulty down by 1 every time diff updates, or time is greater than diff update. That's 1 second there, because it sets it there. And that just again makes sure that it never goes less than 2. Now display, this is where it actually displays the score, so I'll quickly run it again. You've got your text up here. Now obviously just because I'm shooting things, the score isn't going to update. Well, it's updating here because I've got the code in, but the score doesn't update because that isn't actually the score variable that's being used there, because it's an text that you've created. So this part here actually makes sure that the text is edited in as you shoot things. So if your score is greater than old score, this is what I'm saying from the start, old score is just to check things, then old score equals score, so it'll be equal to it, and it sets the string to score. So that'll basically, as soon as score is greater than old score, when you've shot something, it'll update the score. It doesn't allow your score to go backwards. That's again what I was saying about the -50. This won't do that, but you could simply do greater or less than, and that should work as well, because I use it down here for planet. Lives doing exactly the same, sets a string if the lives are less than old lives, because lives will always drop. Again, you could do less than or greater than if you wanted to increase lives at some point. And the same with the planet, and that just basically does it on the fly. This here is just a little bit because you need it for the Android. Well, you don't, but I didn't like the standard position of the joystick, so if it exists, if you've got an Android, it'll automatically been created by this point. Then you just position it, it's just repositioning, and I'm using here more percentage based positions, because I was thinking of Android at that point there. And debug just basically just shows different things, your draw count and things like that, so it's just put that back in, scroll it back down so you can see it's not necessary for the game. And now when I run it, I've just got my little bit of information telling me what it runs at. It's running at 60. Draw time's nice and quick, draw count's good too. Can't get away with any less than that, because all the backdrop and the sprites are all 1 draw count, and all the lives and score and health are another draw count. The text automatically adds 1 in. Can't do much about it. And that's pretty much it. Simple game. You could change things around and change it to, there's a bit more room on that graphic to add extra enemies in, of course. You could make it so that the asteroids don't fall straight down, they could fall across. You could make it more missile commandy. But it's a nice little example just to show you what you can do, and the fact it's only using 1 image keeps the speed up nicely. I'm capturing here and I'm still getting a nice 60 frames per second, lovely. Oh, and there we go, just killed myself. So I think that's pretty much it. I'll scroll through the code as normal. Oh, no, we'll put the enable clear colour on here just to show you the difference. We run that, and now you'll see the asteroids have got a nice little whirly texture. The chute looks nice and I don't know, but you can see it's sort of pointy tailed, it's sort of got a trail behind it, and that's just by using set clear colour. Because if you notice in Paint Shop, that's slightly transparent there, and that will give you this effect. If you've got transparency and you basically use enable clear colour to be 0, it's no longer clearing the frames behind it, and the transparency will eventually clear it, because every time it loops it sort of deletes part of the sprite, but it leaves this sort of trail behind as it slowly clears it. The more transparent it is, the more it'll clear it. The less the less transparent it is, it'll clear it more. So, you know, a fully transparent thing won't leave any trail. If you had something completely transparent, it'd leave a really, really bad trail that never gets deleted. If it's just partially transparent, it'll leave a trail that sort of slowly deletes as the screen updates behind it. But it doesn't work on Android. Without some playing around, I don't think. It just goes totally strange. So, I've left that out as standard, but I thought I'd just explain it there. So yeah, we'll scroll through the code, through the types. There's the variables I've set up, all the sprites. Of course, this is just a very simple skeleton of a game. I'm hoping to, in fact, I'll just click. Oh no, I won't click, it's too annoying. You can probably hear it as well. Yeah, I'll probably do another tutorial just to show you how to get this into a more game-like structure. So you've basically got the game will run, it'll have a little menu, and you can play the game and it'll go back to the menu rather than just ending as it's doing at the moment. But I'm not sure. I mean, that's sort of elementary stuff, but you know, there's people who need it, and it's always nice to see different ways people program things. And you're not going to see many people who program like me on the forums, because most people use functions, and I tend not to use functions. One, I avoid bugs that are in functions, and I don't like bugs, so you know, Go subs haven't got any bugs like that in. They work perfectly. It takes a little bit more thinking about it, because you've got to make sure whenever you Go sub something, so Go sub enemy spawn, you want to return back to that enemy spawn. You can Go sub something else from within the Go sub, but then you've got to make sure you Go sub back to that and then back to the enemy spawn. And some people think that's a bit awkward or just messy, but you know, horses for courses. I've been programming a long time, I'm used to Go subs, and functions for me cause me more headaches than, you know, solve the problems. So generally I just avoid them. I don't like having to set global variables. I don't like the fact that types don't work properly with functions. They're just there. No, I'll just leave them alone, and I'll use Go subs. Yeah, and I'll carry on scrolling through the code quickly. Although I'll probably post up the code. I'll probably post up the entire project with this one, because it's got music and everything. And it's going to be difficult for you to actually do without having this image. You know, you can make your own image, you could use a blank image and just have blobs, but it's not going to be very interesting in comparison. So I'll probably post everything to do with this one. Won't be straight away, but I'll probably zip something up and get it all posted up. So I hope that helped. If you liked it, please subscribe or leave a favourite or a like. And I'll catch you next time.